Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Ronsley, and if you're looking for an edited version of this podcast, you'll find it on all your favorite podcast platforms. Look for Should I Start a Podcast with me, Ronsley, and you'll find a whole bunch of ingenious hacks, tips, tricks that if you're a podcaster, business owner, and want credibility, want revenue, want new listeners, go to Should I Start a Podcast and you'll get all of that in your earbuds. Go check that out. And also, if you don't know, We Are Podcast 2022 is back for its 9th iteration, Australia's first podcasting conference that I started way back in 2015. Is back in Brisbane, 9th, 10th, 11th of November. Go check it out, wearepodcast.com. Today, I'm going to get into a mistake that we make as business owner podcasters getting into podcasting, which is expecting our listener to listen to our ramblings. That's only if you do that, but I'll get into that towards the end of the show. Today, I have Joey Coleman in the house, who is a dear friend and I've known for a few years, but he's a legend on stage, absolute legend. And I've seen him work the stage, I've seen him work the crowd, I've seen his presentations, and they're absolutely amazing. He's got a podcast. He's 170 episodes in with a co-host, and we're going to get into those dynamics and how he releases that. But I want to get Joey on the show as quickly as possible. Joey, how are you doing? Welcome to Should I Start a Podcast?
Ronsley, thank you so much. It is a treat and a pleasure to be here. And thanks to everybody who's watching live or listening to the podcast. Super excited to be part of this conversation.
So cool. Thank you for making the time. I know that in general, you're very protective of what you do and when you say yes. So I appreciate you saying yes to this and indulging me in my little experiments. Let's get into the meat and potatoes straight away. Just give us an idea of what business looks like for you, and how does the podcast fit into that equation?
Yeah, so business for me, I spend all day, every day teaching companies how to keep their customers and keep their employees. The way I do that is I give speeches, I lead workshops, I facilitate training sessions, I write books. I look for ways to help educate folks because I think most business owners want to create remarkable experiences for their customers. They want to create remarkable experiences for their employees, but they sometimes struggle with how to do that. So we share frameworks and methodologies and tips and tricks and case studies to help them achieve that. The bulk of my day is spent on the road, giving speeches, leading those workshops, that type of thing. When I have time, I'm doing some writing. And if there's any time left over for after that is when I do podcasting. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying podcasting isn't important to me. I'm just saying that it fits into my business as opposed to being the primary driver of my business.
Got it. So on point with the way you articulate everything is like on point. Usually I feel when you're around, I feel a little bit under because you're so articulate with the way you say things that I feel like every time I just made a note to myself, stop saying Ronsley. So let's worry about my personal issues later. You're living this amazing life, which most people want, which is I just want to speak Ronsley. I just want to be an author. I just want to do my podcast. What does it take to get or create a life like this?
Only 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears. That's all. That's all it takes. You too can have the same life I have with 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears. No, I mean, I've been at this for a long time. I started my first business, I'm not kidding, 20 years ago, 21 now that I think about it, in 2001, which was an ad agency, a marketing business, a branding business. And as that business grew, I realized that lots of companies were really good at acquiring customers, which is what, frankly, I helped them with, and not so good at retaining customers. And so my business started to pivot and evolve into a consultancy that was all around customer experience and customer retention. As that business grew and those efforts grew, I started speaking more, I started writing more, I started doing podcasts, and the design and kind of acquisition side of my business, the marketing side of the business, kind of went away. And so that's what I've been doing. And then, as you might imagine, and we've known each other for several years now, one thing leads to another. You know, you give one speech, you do a really good job. Hopefully, other people in the audience want to book you for the next speech. You go on one podcast, you hopefully give a good interview. Other podcast hosts want to host you on their show. And so these things have a tendency to build on top of themselves, which is why we all know that no one's an overnight success, but it's been a little bit of an adventurous road to get here.
Why not? Yeah, I mean, everyone keeps talking about overnight successes. How, for me, for one, like everyone started to talk about how Amplify became $1 million company in 9 months, but I'm like, dude, this took 11 years to build. Like, I failed multiple times. I had like over $500,000 in debt and then paid that off. And it's all this journey that never gets spoken about. When you look back at 21 years, what are the stories that haven't gotten told yet that pops to your mind?
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't at $500,000 in debt, but I was about a year in, and I was 70 grand in debt, all on credit cards, all at 29.99% interest. So I can empathize with that stack where you're like, what is happening in my life? I've had employees. I've not had employees. I've landed clients. I've lost clients. I've built a business around designing logos, and then it was a business around designing logos and ad campaigns, and then it was logos and ad campaigns and websites, and then I got tired of building websites, so it just went back to logos and ad campaigns, and then it started turning into speeches and consulting. And I think at the end of the day, what I know is probably true of your business, Ronzi, as well as most of the folks listening who've been in business for any appreciable amount of time, is that there often isn't a clear path or a clear progression when you're starting. It's easy to connect the dots. It's easy to see the threads of connection and connectivity on the back end. But lots of times when we're in it, we're just responding to what's in front of us. And some business leaders, gurus, experts will say that that is a mistake. I personally believe that that's called living. I think the reality is, as you experience new things, you get exposed to new ideas, you grow and evolve in your own thinking, your own values, your own beliefs, your own priorities. Your business should necessarily morph and evolve with you. And mine certainly has.
Yeah, huge. So with that evolution of you learning all these different things and sort of picking them up as you go, what did you ever have a decision that you went, well, this is a 50-50 here, and how do I pick? And do you have a method to pick? Do you kind of like go with your gut, your brain? What happens in the moment, and how do you deal with that?
Oh, I have those decisions on a regular basis. I wouldn't say daily, but I'll give you some insight. So we'll pull back the curtain a little bit. You are catching me 24 hours away from when I submit my next book. My first book was called Never Lose a Customer Again. This next book is called Never Lose an Employee Again. Now, I've been in the experience space on both the customer side and the employee side for long enough to know that there are actually two sides of the same coin, right? As we enhance the customer experience, we necessarily enhance the employee experience. As the employee experience goes down, the customer experience goes down. Those connections are very logical and very obvious to me. But when I first started talking to people about the employee experience book, I definitely had some folks that said, well, Joey, you're the customer experience guy. Why are you writing about employee experience? And I'm like, well, because it's the same thing. It's just happening inside your organization instead of outside your organization. And I had some folks that I really trust and I admire and I value their opinions who said to me, oh, Joey, I think this is a mistake. You just need to double down on the customer side. And that would have been fine. And I think their thoughts and the emotion and the intention behind their comment was pure and was valid.
Yeah.
But I looked at it and said, I'm really interested in customer experience, but I can't talk about customer experience anymore without also talking about employee experience. And if I can write a book about employee experience that serves as a companion, so we've got a 2-book set, Never Lose a Customer Again and Never Lose an Employee Again, that a business owner can read, and after reading those 2 books, understand 98% of the humans they will interact with in their workday. The majority of humans we interact with in our workday are either our customers or our coworkers.
Correct.
There are clients or our employees, right?
Correct.
If I can write 2 books that provide a methodology for helping people navigate that, that's a way in which I want to serve. And so I move forward with it.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, to answer your question, it's useful to get opinions. It's useful to look at what's going on in the marketplace. But at the end of the day, your decisions have to be your own. And I have advisors and I have masterminds I'm in and I have friends and I've got an incredible wife who's been an entrepreneur longer than I have and gives me amazing advice and support. But at the end of the day, I'm the one who's looking at Joey in the mirror. I'm the one who's clicking along on the keyboard at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's on a layover. Whoop, the flight just got canceled. The 1 hour layover is now a 12-hour layover. Who's sitting in the airport going, is this my life? So I need to make sure that the decisions I make are in alignment for me.
Yeah.
And hopefully that ends up being enough for everybody else.
Oh, wow. I've got goosebumps, by the way, and you do this a lot when you speak, and I don't know whether you are aware of it, but I wanted to make it clear to you that you have an eloquent way of putting words together that actually impact someone when they're listening to it. And I think that's an absolutely amazing skill that I know you were not born with and you've developed over the years. So kudos to you to like get better at communication. Let's talk about experience and let's get into that before we get into the podcasting side of things. You mentioned experience a few times. You spoke about customer experience. You spoke about employee experience. How can we as business owners take a step back and just look at experience in general? Because as a business owner, when we're starting off, there's so many spinning plates. Like you got to find markets, you got to find team, operations, culture. There's a lot of moving plates, and experience gets thrown to the wayside because we're like, let's get it done. How can we step back and just look at it from a holistic point of view and just start making some dents in the experience? Because what I'm finding is my culture and the way I've been brought up is lending itself to the experience side of things, which I'm trying to find a way how this has all come together, but it's actually from my culture, my grandmothers and how we bring people together. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the experience side of things and how as business owners we can look at experience and start to make a dent in that when it comes to everything, employees, customers, and stakeholders.
Oh, Ronsley, I love this question for so many reasons. First and foremost, thanks so much for the kind words about the speaking. I greatly appreciate that. I love that I get to give speeches. I love that I get to do podcast interviews. So it's just a real treat to be able to share thoughts and observations and maybe some lessons I've learned along the way. So hopefully people can avoid some of the mistakes I've made and move in a more speedy fashion towards the goals they're striving for.
Yeah.
I think experience is at the end of the day the biggest driver in the human condition, and it's the thing that relates to all of us the most. What I mean by that is if I say, what's the experience of seeing your child for the first time? What's the experience when that person walks into the room and you catch their eye and you think, oh, I've got to meet that person? What's the experience when you're in nature and you see something that is so awe-inspiring that it provides the foundation of the word awesome? What is the experience when we deal with loss and it rips us to our core? What is the experience when we interact with the joy that lights us up and energizes us and propels us forward at a time where we didn't think we had anything left to give? At the end of the day, to me, experience is, as the kids say, all the feels. It's how much can we embrace all the feeling. And you reference culture. I think every culture has its own experience. And one reason why I have been a lover and an addict of travel since I was very young is because it gives me exposure to other cultures, to other communities, to other points of view, perspective, ways of living that by default influence my experience. And I think that makes me a better human. I think the more experiences we have, the more diverse our experience, the more varied our experience, the better we are able to navigate life and ideally serve as an example to our fellow humans of, as I tell my two boys who are 6 and 9, making good choices.
Yeah.
See, I think everything in life is a choice. Everything. Everything
Yeah.
is a choice. And in every moment, we get the chance to re-choose and recommit. And the question is, are we making good choices or bad choices? And sometimes we don't know whether that's going to be a good choice or a bad choice until much later. Sometimes we think a choice is going to be a great choice. We wake up a few days later and we're like, oh, that was a horrible choice. Some days we have something that we're like, that was a bad choice. And then 10 years later, you're like, yeah, but that choice led to this moment.
Yeah.
So maybe it wasn't that bad after all. I think experience is the thread, the fabric that ties all of those things together. And I think as leaders, as business owners, as podcasters, the more we can strive to have experiences and create experiences and be aware of the experiences that are happening around us, the richer our lives will be.
Massive. I love how you light up when we talk about experience and how you went into this depth of experience. And you mentioned fields and all the fields, and you mentioned emotions. And I feel like as business owners, we try to get away from the emotions. You also mentioned grief.
Oh, yeah.
A good friend of ours has written a great book on grief, Sherry Walling. And
Yes.
it's phenomenal because I'm bringing Sherry into this conversation primarily because I opened the book, and one of the first few chapters, which is only 6 pages long, is how to talk to someone when they're grieving, which everyone goes through. Like, to your point, everyone goes, as business owners, we all go through these same conversations of keeping our clients and keeping our and this grieving thing is one of those things that happens to everyone, and we all can relate to dealing with it. The experience side of things we've all dealt with, but we find a way to kind of maybe push it to the side because we feel maybe it's not logical enough that we can go into it. How, when you start talking about experience, you mention all these different emotions that we have. I think, is it for us to start paying attention to those emotions and keeping track of what it makes us feel? Is it like when we feel it, do we pay attention to the story behind it and capture that so we can use that later? How do we go about looking at our lives and paying attention to these experiences that we can actually learn from them, use them, and then get better as a result of experiencing them?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is identify that for the majority of us, myself included, we spend most of our day operating in a very tight emotional band. Our emotions never get too hot, and they never get too cold. We kind of operate in this band. And business, lots of quote unquote traditional business, encourages us to stay in that band. When somebody starts to get emotional, we say, well, it's not personal, it's business. When somebody maybe tears up at work, we say, hey, this is a place of business. We imply that we're not supposed to go outside of the band. What I've found, and I know from our friendship that I know you have found, is that the more we expand that band, the richer life gets, the better it gets. You start talking about grief, and I'm tearing up a little. Not for any other reason other than when you talk about grief and loss, and our mutual friend Sherry Walling, I think about the grief and loss that propelled her to write that book. And I feel that because I've been in the room with her when she's been feeling that. And I've experienced that, and it translates to the page for her, and it translates to the conversation she's had about this. And there isn't a person listening to our call today who hasn't experienced gut-wrenching grief and soul-lifting joy. But when we were experiencing it, were we aware of it? Or were we trying to numb or deaden down the scope of that feeling? Were we leaning into the experience? Were we embracing the experience? Were we letting the experience flow through us with, hopefully, lack of judgment and lack of criticism about the experience? Or were we saying, I got to get this back into that tight little band where I can operate, where I won't draw too much attention to myself, where there won't be too much focus on me, and I can just push forward. That's an option. But I posit that it is not an option or an approach that humans are born with. I think that is conditioned. It is conditioned by parents. It is conditioned by schools. It is conditioned by employers. It is conditioned by cultures. And depending on the culture, you have a different experience. I just spent a week in Ireland with my wife, had an absolutely amazing time. And one of the things we were talking about, we were at an event where there were some Aussies, there were some Irish folks, there were some Europeans from, the main continent, there were some Americans. And we were talking about this idea that lots of times when you are outside of the United States and you're an American, people will talk about how loud Americans are. And let's be honest, Americans are super loud and boisterous. People from the United States, pretty loud when they get out in the rest of the world. And I used to judge that. I used to think, oh, I don't want to do that. I need to dial that down. It's disrespectful to the culture. And I was talking to some folks in the then Soviet Union about this. So I'm dating myself a little bit in this conversation, right? And they were saying, you know what's fascinating about Americans? You sound free. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they're like, you're loud. You're boisterous. You use your hands. You talk big. We don't do that here. Because here, if you do that, the consequence could be prison, a gulag, death.
Yeah.
In your culture, in your country, that's often rewarded. That's often encouraged. And so I'm not saying that one approach or the other is bad. Please don't mishear me. What I'm saying is the depth of life that we experience, the way that we show up in the world is a choice. And I like to hope that we could all get a little more conscious and intentional about the choices we're making.
Man, every time you're saying something, I'm taking notes here because I don't know which question to ask next. But you spoke about lack of judgment. You spoke about perspective. And I wanted to ask you on what did you experience to give you perspective? But then you just gave me an example right now on how you were looking at something that you were born with or something that you had inherently as a negative, which I did for a long time. I spoke English my whole life, and I make this joke that English is not my first language, and I can, but it is actually my first language. I speak to my parents in English. It's really funny. But when I came to Australia, I didn't speak like this. Obviously, I had a different accent, and I find it crazy that I make all my money right now from using my voice, which is mental. But I was not like this. And I think Black Lives Matters and all these things that happened in the last few years allowed me to reconcile my heritage and where I'm from and how I show up. So I totally relate to what you're saying. And I want to sort of take this conversation into the part where you say that we were conditioned to not speaking up. Because for me, that is exactly why I do what I do. And I feel like my ancestors were not given the opportunity to just say whatever they felt like saying, whenever they felt like saying it. And we, in general, here in the first world, kind of take for granted the opportunities we have to use our voices. So let's get into that part of the conversation, because you've given yourself full permission to kind of go after the things that you care about the most. What got you to that point that you went, this is it, this is what I care about, this is the line in the sand, and let anyone attack me, I'm happy to defend my argument, I'm happy to give it a new voice, I'm happy to refine it. How do you get to that point?
Well, let's begin by acknowledging the elephant in the room, Ronsley. Okay? I am a white, middle-aged, heterosexual, cisgendered male. Okay? So from a place of privilege, it's okay for my voice to be loud because my voice has been the loud voice for a long time. And when I say my voice, I mean folks that look like me, sound like me. Okay? I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that I acknowledge that my experience is very different from your experience, from someone else's experience who may have grown up a different gender, with a different identity, with a different culture, in a different country, in a different socioeconomic standing, whatever it may be. Right. So we first need to acknowledge that, you know, I don't want anyone to think I hit a home run when I was born on third base.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just put that out on the table right away. Secondly, what I have tried to do as I become more aware of my own voice, my own beliefs, my own ideas, and how those sit in a society, not only my local community, my state, my country, our planet, right, is what am I using my voice for? I've got this voice. I've got this mic. I've got this camera. What am I using it for? The same platitudes and observations that everybody else makes? Or am I trying to bring the thunder? Am I trying to present a different perspective? Am I trying to, push a different way of thinking or a different way of experiencing life out into the world in a way that says, give this a try? I'm not guaranteeing that it'll work for you. But what I am promising is that if you try it, you will learn things about yourself, about your peers, about your community, about your place of business, about your work, about your craft that you won't know if you don't lean into it, if you don't push forward with it. And so I think at the end of the day, it gives us an opportunity to say, well, how far do I want to experience today? And I have plenty of days where, honestly, full disclosure, where I say, today is not going to be a big experience day.
Yeah.
Today I'm going to stay home. Today I'm just going to recharge.
Yeah.
Today I'm going to spend self-care time. Then there are other days where it's, hey, I'm in front of a stage. I've got 2,000 people in front of me in this audience. What am I going to do to make this hour the most memorable hour of their day, their week, their year?
Yeah.
That's exciting for me.
Yeah.
And I try not to take that for granted. And I try wherever possible to open myself up, to let the moment, to let the spirit, to let the environment flow through me in whatever way is going to best serve whoever it is I'm talking to.
I want to touch on this topic before I get into the podcast and what you do before, what you do during, and what you do after your recording phase in your podcast. But before this, you spoke about Ireland. We have a common friend, Philip McKernan, who drives.
That's who I was there seeing, actually. Full disclosure. So yeah, Philip's a great human being, but I know a lot of people like to give Philip grief. So yes, it was McKernan's fault that I was there.
Well, McKernan is a problem in general because he says things that makes you go into a part of yourself that you've put away and tucked nicely that no one ever knew about, but somehow he sees. And again, full disclosure, Philip McKernan has changed my life entirely. The way I present, the way I do everything, the way I even start a new client now, they start with their truth first because of Philip. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because Philip has a great quote about our deepest gift lying next to, or our greatest gift lying next to our deepest wound. Do you relate to that? Does that feel right for you with what you're doing? How does that quote come into play when it comes to Joey Coleman?
Yeah, I absolutely relate to that quote. I relate to a lot of the things that Philip asks and states and questions and encourages us to consider. I'm not exactly sure how my gifts tie to my wounds, but I know that they're related. And I'm not entirely sure that you reach a point where you completely understand them. My goal is to understand them a little bit better each year. That's what I'm striving for. I'm striving for progression. I'm striving for evolution. I used to spend a lot of time striving for finish lines, for accomplishment, for when is this done. And what I realized, and I think as entrepreneurs, we're particularly guilty of this, is that we're constantly looking for the next thing to achieve. But then when we do it, we don't celebrate.
Yes.
We go find another thing to go achieve. And what happens is you wake up one day and it's been 20 years and you're like, yeah, I've done a couple things, but I never really celebrated them. I never really, congratulated myself. I think we're so afraid of becoming egomaniacal. We're so afraid of becoming narcissistic because we see that in our societies, right? We see that on the telly. We see that on the radio. We listen to that in the interview. And there are aspects of it that are so antithetical to the human condition that we repel that. And we say, I never want to be that. And so we refuse to acknowledge what we are and what we've done and what we've accomplished. Here's the kicker. If you're concerned about maybe becoming a narcissist or maybe becoming an egomaniac, you actually don't need to worry about it. Because someone who's a narcissist or an egomaniac would never even have that thought. So the fact that you've had the thought lets you know that we want to be aware of how we're showing up in the world. Sure, we want to be aware of our language and our privilege and how we're swinging through our interactions. However, I think most humans could stand to shine a little more light on themselves and take a little more pride in how they're showing up and give themselves a little more grace for when they don't show up the way they want to.
We've got a common friend, Dr. Doug Brackman, who I think it was in Park City. I did his whole meditation at gunpoint. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it was the first time through that whole meditation at gunpoint that I realized the same thing that you just spoke about, that I did not even realize that every time I achieved something, I didn't even celebrate, because what was happening was I was trying to hit this target, right, with the gun, and I kept missing. And on the fourth go, I finally hit it, and I was like, okay, I was going to put it down, and I remember this so clearly. He puts his hand on my shoulder and he goes, can you enjoy that for a second? And I was like, whoa, that blew my mind and showed me perspective that I was taking for granted. I didn't know I was I had that inside me. And as a result of that, had opened up a whole bunch of things, including for my 40th, I gave my parents this massive big sheet of 7 columns, and I wrote extensive lists of all the things I've managed to do in 40 years because of them and the platform that they gave me. And I think that only happened.
Wow.
That only happened because of Doug Brackman. And because of that particular instance that I realized, hold on, Ronsley, you are one of 2 or 3 people in your year 10 class that made it out of Goa, out of India. And not many people could have done the things you've done because of the opportunity you've been given, because your parents gave you that platform, and because their parents before them gave them that platform, and so on.
Yes.
And I find that whole ecosystem absolutely mental, right? And then we have a community like Mastermind Talks that makes it even more closer from a friend standpoint. Let's step back a little bit. We're getting too emotional, and we're going to go back into this band.
Let's get back into the band. Tighten it down a little, people. Somebody's logging in there like, this is called the Should I Start a Podcast, not Do I Need a Kleenex show. Come on. What is going on?
Let's get into the podcasting side of things. What is your process before you start recording and when you hit record? What happens? What are you thinking about before? How do you prepare? And what happens when you hit the record button? What is that process like for Joey?
Yeah, this is a gigantic question, but let me try to narrow it down as much as I can. And any of these things that you want to pull on the thread, don't hesitate to.
Sure.
So first and foremost, my co-host, Dan Gingiss, and I made some very conscious decisions early on about what our podcast is, and more importantly, actually, what our podcast isn't. And we created some clear, bright lines that still allow us to experiment and try new things, but it made getting distracted less common. It made going off course less of a threat. Because as long as we keep coming back to what we're trying to do and coming back on a regular basis, it allows us to keep moving forward. So a couple of those boundaries that we decided on. We wanted a show that was about a half an hour long. Sometimes it goes up as much as 45 minutes, but for the most part, it's a shorter show. We wanted a show that had 3 10 to 12-minute segments. Now, sometimes those segments are 6 minutes, sometimes they're 17, but 3 segments that were bite-sized moments of customer and employee experience delight. When we came to thinking about sponsors and partners, we didn't want to do traditional ad reads. You don't like those. I don't like those. No listener in the history of the world likes those. We wanted to have partners, and not just in the sense that everybody who has a podcast wants partners. No, we wanted somebody that would actually say to us, we trust you to take our content and to turn it into something different, to turn it into something that is in alignment with our goals and our values, but is not a script that we handed you. It's a different approach. It's a different choice. It's a different consideration. And last but not least, we decided that we were not going to do interviews. Now, let me tell you, friends, you knock interviews out of there, your production and your scheduling has just gone from level 10 difficulty to level 1 difficulty instantly from that sole decision. Now, because Dan and I are co-hosts and we're both on every episode, we were already scheduling with each other to find time to record. We didn't want to augment that or complicate that by scheduling with a guest. So we've never had a guest in 10 seasons of episodes. We do about 16 episodes a season. We do a fall season and a spring season, kind of with a school year, and we take the summer off. And if somebody has something they want to say on our show that we think is valuable, we have them submit a less than 2-minute audio clip, and we insert it in the show. And that's our other voices. That's our vocal variety. We're not interviewing them live. We go to the tape, let folks hear what they have to say, and we come back. And we really only do that with authors or people that are truly remarkable, that we're telling a segment or a story about them, and we want to include that piece of the puzzle. So to answer your question, first and foremost, we narrow down what we're doing. Now, what else do? We have a blend of scripting the shows where we actually write out a lot of what we're going to say. And then we have times where we just do bullet points of what we want to talk about. Really depends on the complexity of the topic, really depends on how much time we have to prep before we record an episode. And interestingly enough, I find for me, scripting it is faster than doing the bullet points.
Interesting. Wow.
That seems counterintuitive, right? But to paraphrase on the infamous Mark Twain quote, I'm sorry for the length of this letter. If I would have had more time, it would have been shorter.
Yeah.
Right? That's the reality. And then we find a time where we're going to schedule. We jump in and record. We do 2 soundtracks. We put those files into a Google Drive folder. Our engineer produces them. He sends back the first take. The way we've divided the responsibilities, my co-host Dan listens to that in full, gives any editing notes. The revised version comes back. He checks it to make sure everything's good, but our amazing engineer's been working with us long enough, we don't even need to check. Then he passes it to me. I load it to Libsyn, and it goes out to the world.
Oh, wow. That's
so we divide the duties. That's it. Super straight, super clean.
Wow. That's super fascinating. I want to get into the interview side of things because I tell everyone to have an interview type show. So let's get into that.
Oh, nice. I'm breaking the rules already.
Yeah. But I'd love to point out a couple of things. One is on the show, you'll do a really good job of the sponsorship side of things. It's very different. It's not something that you normally listen to. You hear it and you're like, what's going on here? And you're trying to like pay attention, and then you're like, oh, this is an ad. And then you realize after it's done, oh shit, I just watched and listened to an ad. So it's amazing.
Exactly. That's what we're going for. That's exactly what we're going for. Ronzi, I got to tell you as an aside, one of my favorite reviews we have on iTunes came from last year. And the review is all about our sponsor segments for last season. And the review basically says, when was the last time you listened to a podcast where you enjoyed the sponsor segment? When we got that review, I called my co-host Dan and I said, brother, we've arrived.
Yeah.
9 seasons in, we've accomplished our goal for season 1, which was to have the sponsor pieces that are paying for the production be as valuable to our listeners as they are to us from like an administrative operational point of view. We
So
achieved that. Took us 9 seasons, but we got there.
overnight success. That took 9 seasons to
Overnight
make.
success. Yep.
Phenomenal job on that. The second phenomenal job you've done is the decision to concept your show, which a lot of people don't do, and it kind of has free reign over things. And what tends to happen when people start a podcast is because we are business owners becoming podcasters, not podcasters.
Yes.
You know, so we're learning.
That's
the
a huge distinction. Ronsley, if I may, please say that again, because everybody who's listening, even if you've heard Ronsley say this before, you would benefit from hearing it with new ears today.
Yeah, it is. Every time I see someone starting a podcast for the first time, it reminds me of when I went surfing 20 years ago for the first time, and I paid for a 3-hour lesson. And for the first 90 minutes, I was on the beach kind of going, why are you wasting my time on the beach? Like, the water is just there. And why are we trying to do this on sand? And then 90 minutes later, they're like, all right, let's try all the stuff we've learned. Let's go into the water. And in the first 5 seconds, I realized, oh, that's why we spent 90 minutes. So
because I can only swallow so much salt water in one day.
Yeah, and then there's waves that they go higher and they go lower. It's not like a steady lake. So it's really fascinating how when we start off, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going surfing, I'm going to ride the wave. That is my imagination before I rock up to this thing. And while I'm in the lesson, I'm still thinking all that until I get to the part where I have to do it. And then I realize, wait, I am very deficient in a lot of skills here because I've never done it before. How do I expect my body or my mind to cope with something that I have not done before? And for podcasters or business owners becoming podcasters, that is the big step that we've got to acknowledge. Like, I love how you acknowledge you being a white man. I there's a lot of things that you do that I have taken notes on. I think I should start my own Evernote folder from Joey Coleman, because one of the other things that you've done that is amazing that I talk about, and I have been speaking about it ever since we made this time, is you're one of the very few people who send me a message back asking me, how do I show up best for your show? How do I show up in a way that your audience receives me best? What do I talk? And I know you, Joey, as a person, and you're very thorough, and this is a total Joey thing to do, but the fact that you've taken it and acted on it makes me like you even more, even though I've known you for a while, because I use that as an example for me to do for someone else. Because what I realized in that one email that was 2 lines is that you took all the work that I have been putting into my brand for the last decade and more and asked me, how do I make this more valuable? And that was very, very appreciated, because no one knows how much effort they've put into their brand unless except themselves. So full kudos to that.
Well, thank you.
Let's stop giving you enough compliments. Let's talk about interviews. So I tell a lot of people about interviews primarily because I am of the opinion that a podcast, everyone sees a podcast as a content tool or a marketing tool. I see a podcast as a business development tool. And in general, business owners don't have business development conversations. So the way I kind of tell business owners who are starting a podcast that if you were to get successful by doing a rep, what would that look like? And this is the example, is like doing the interview, having the connection, making this deep connection with someone, and then seeing how the possibilities turn out, right? How do you go about making business development conversations, or how do you create that with the podcast? How do you, once it's done, how do you get that to other people? Because what you've cut out of your whole equation is the fact that your guest is not sharing it to their audience, right? So how do you compensate for that with the concept of your show, or do you at all, or do you even care?
Yeah, I won't be so brazen as to say that I don't care, but it's not a priority. Business development for me from the podcast is not a priority. And in the answer to full disclosure, and I think he'd be fine with me sharing this, my co-host Dan and I, our priorities and our intentions have evolved and changed over the course of the 10 seasons. We're in season 10 right now, right? So there have been times where it's been more important to do something than other. When we first started, we basically had a situation where our mutual friend Jay Bear, I'll tell this story real quickly. I'm giving a speech at an event called Social Media Marketing World, which is hysterical because I am not on social media in any way, shape, or form. And I'm the closing keynote at Social Media Marketing World. So it's super exciting. At the time I took the stage, I had 124 followers on Twitter. Not 124 million, not 124,000, 124, because I had signed up for Twitter the week before, and then it got tweeted right before my keynote that what my handle was, and a bunch of people in the room started following me. So I went from like 124 followers at the beginning of the keynote to like several hundred at the end of the keynote because,
Wow.
and I don't know if I have tweeted, I don't remember doing it. Right? So we have very different approaches. Whereas my co-host Dan is all about the Twitters. And that's a running joke on our show, right? He's all about the tweets and the Twitters and all of that stuff. So I think at the end of the day, couple things as it relates to business development. My main intention for the podcast is to clarify my thinking.
Yeah.
That's why I do the show.
Yeah.
I do the show to solidify and clarify my thinking, because as a speaker and a writer and a consultant, that is hugely valuable to me. I can monetize that clarity of thought in those other verticals a lot faster and with a lot headache and heartache than trying to monetize it in the podcast space.
Brilliant.
So I just don't even try to do it. That's not the intention. Now, does the podcast make money? Yes, right? We have one or maybe two partners per season. They pay what is, frankly, from what I hear, and I'm happy, I don't know what the rules are on the show, but I'm happy to disclose this.
Please.
Somebody who sponsors our season pays $20,000 US. And they get 16 30-minute episodes, and they get a 2 to 3 minute segment in each one. Now, as I understand it, that is not normal.
No, it's not.
Because, by the way, CPMs are never part of the conversation. They never have been. They never will be. That's not what we're doing. We don't have a show that is about, we have 5 listeners less than Ferris. We have 5 listeners less than Gary Vee. No, that's not what we're doing. Our show is about customer experience for customer experience minded people. So we have a lot of folks that are the head of customer experience, the head of customer service, the head of marketing at companies around the world that listen to our show. So what you're getting is in front of the exact right people. You're not getting in front of the masses. And our partners are very clear in the fact that's what they want. They want to be talking to other people who care about customer and employee experience, not to every business owner in the world, not to every podcast listener into the world, not to every tech bro or Pinterest girl or whatever it is, you know, that somebody, I hear all these phrases. I don't use these phrases. I realize I just did, but lots of folks in the podcasting space are like, oh, these are who our audience is. Great. Awesome. Ours is customer experience professionals and employee experience professionals. That's who we speak to. That's our business model.
Wow. I wanted to wind this up, but then I just realized I need another question to ask before I sort of land this plane. And the question is what you just mentioned, which is you don't use CPM when you go after your partners. You've referred to them very specifically since the start of the show as partners, and you have a very systematic way of getting them on board. How do you invite them? What is the lure that you use, and how do you kind of get them on board to realize the return that they're going to get from the money that they pay you?
I'll be totally honest. My amazing co-host Dan Gingiss does the bulk of the work on this. Right, these are folks that he knows that usually that I get to know. Dan used to work as customer experience head at a couple brands you might have heard of: Discover Card,
Yeah.
McDonald's, and Humana. Okay, so he's played. We joke that he's been in the big corporate space. I've been in the medium to little corporate space, right? And totally happy with that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's what we do. So lots of the folks that have been our partners over the last 10 seasons are folks that are very much interested in targeting those spaces. And through Dan's involvement online and with other things he's done, he's come across them. And then we get into these conversations. And I think if you were to interview them and ask them what they like about it, stop and think about the person who's the head of marketing at a corporation that can afford to sponsor a podcast. Just kind of picture that person in your mind.
Yeah.
Do you think the bulk of their day is being told yes or no?
Being told
The
yes.
bulk of their day is being told, I would posit maybe being told no. Hey, we've got this idea for this amazing campaign we want to do. Yeah, well, we're going to need to pull the money down a little bit. You're not going to be able to do that. Oh, I want to create this award-winning video with Beyonce, and it'll be this, and we'll do it at the Super Bowl. Yeah, no, we're not quite that big yet. Nope, you got to tone it down. When they get on the call with us, it's a game of plussing it up. They're like, well, we want to do a thing, and we'll have an ad read, right? And I'm like, nope, no ad reads. No ad reads. We're not doing anything like that. We're going to do a skit. We're going to do a funny fact. We're going to do, something different and unexpected and unique, right? And suddenly they're getting to have conversations about what's possible as opposed to what's allowed.
Yeah.
That's fun for them. It's fun for us. And we just stack it and we build on it. And I've been very excited. We had a sponsor early on, a partner early on, who decided to stop their partnership with us and hire us to create a podcast for them. We had another partner who was our partner for 3 years who decided to stop their partnership with us and create an online YouTube game show about customer experience with us. So when you asked earlier about biz dev,
Yeah.
and kind of, that's my biz dev.
Yeah.
Biz dev, and this is how I think about it with my speeches and with my books as well. I believe that as a speaker, and this is whether you're on stage or as a podcast host, if you create amazing interactions, if you create an experience when people are in your presence, watching you, listening to you, partaking in your conversation, that is so remarkable, they will want to do more with you, period. They will want to book you. They will want to buy your stuff. They will want to follow you. Those things will necessarily happen. So what we try to focus on is every season, Dan and I like to be able to say, at the end of the season, we always have a conversation. We do a debrief. And the question I always ask Dan is, do you think that was our best season yet? And if we ever answer that question, no, that will be the end of the Experience This show.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be abundantly clear about that. If we ever answer that question and go, nah, just wasn't there, guess what? The show has ended. That's it. Because if we're not worthy of your listener time,
Yeah.
why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why are we wasting our time? But more importantly, why are we wasting your time? Not the experience I want to be involved with.
Love it. I could keep talking to you. In fact, I've just missed my whole mistake that I wanted to cover because you're just on point and we've gone down this amazing rabbit hole. So if you're watching right now and you're waiting for my mistake to talk about, I'm going to cover that in the next live because I think that there's lots of gold that Joey has dropped. So Joey, one final question before we land this plane. If someone's obviously listening to you and love what you've done, where can they find you and consume more of your work?
This is an interesting question, Ronsley, right? So, a couple places, right? Number one, my first book was called Never Lose a Customer Again. It's available in hardcover edition, it's available as an ebook. If you've liked the sound of my voice on our conversation, it's available as an audiobook that I narrate. I can read the book to you as you work out or fall asleep. So, that's probably the best way to really dive into the substantive content. The next book, Never Lose an Employee Again, is coming summer of 2023. So, that
Yeah.
one's coming in the future. The podcast is called The Experience This Show, right? We're in season 10, drops every Tuesday at 3 a.m. Eastern, and is 30 minutes of customer and employee experience delight. And then
Yeah.
the third place to find me is on my website, which is joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a baby kangaroo. Coleman, Coleman, like the camping equipment company in America, but no relation. Joeycoleman.com. You can find videos, you can find more information. There's some free bonus downloads, that kind of thing,
Amazing.
available on the website.
Amazing. And we'll have all those links in the show notes, but also the edited version of this will be on Should I Start a Podcast? It'll come out next year and in time for your new book and the book that you're excited about, which you're going to submit today, which is so exciting at how this all panned out. Congratulations, Joy, on everything you've done. I love the 100 days. I use it a lot in my onboarding. Your book has inspired me, my clients, a lot of people that I know. Your voice, phenomenal. I love the work that you do on your voice and how you get a chance to refine your thinking, and it's very evident from the way you show up. So thank you for everything that you've done, all the work you've put out on the planet, and the work that you keep doing for us. So thank you for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, Ronsley, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. It's a real honor to be on the show. I've been a big fan of yours and the work you're doing in the podcasting space for a long, long time. And I want to do a special thanks and shout out to everybody who watched live and who listened to the show. Neither Ronsley or I take for granted your investment of time and attention. We really appreciate it. And hopefully during our conversation, you got one or two things that you can apply, whether that's in your business life, for your personal life, or with the podcast you're already creating or already running, or the podcast that you're planning to create. So appreciate your time and attention.
Thanks. Thank you.